So back in June, Drew and I did an episode called Trump's No Good, Very Bad Week. And at the time, I think both of us thought that he really couldn't do any worse. Here we are in early September, or I guess mid-September, and it looks like Trump's outdone himself. Last week started out with a bombshell Atlantic article that claimed that Trump had disparaged World War I veterans, and it was then corroborated by several other news sources. Then a damning interview with Bob Woodward was released, in which Trump talked about downplaying coronavirus back in February. And it also looks like Trump is blowing through his campaign funds. So it hasn't been a great week for Trump. And today we're going to cover all of that on the Tonic Accord podcast. What's up, Drew? How are you? Good to be back speaking together again.
Yeah, it is good to be back. And for those that do follow the podcast, we had to kind of take a little breather. I was in the middle of a move, and then because of COVID, it took a while to get my internet set up. So I had no choice, but now we're back. It feels good to be back, all connected in, avoiding the smoke clouds that surround my state of California. And we're just staying inside, talking about politics. So it does feel good to be back.
Yeah, man, definitely. The smoke is insane.
It's rough.
I was looking at a map of all of California of, the air quality index. And I mean, there were places like down in Mammoth Lakes and Bishop where it was like seven or 800 in the last couple days. And it's holy crap, that is ridiculous. Like, I mean, it's bad here and it's like 160, 170. So imagine like 800. Woof.
Yeah, it was 166 here today. So it's been rough.
Which is horrible, but I guess just at least we can get outside still. But yeah, so what are your thoughts, I guess, just starting off with Trump's week, or I guess last week now that we're recording on this Tuesday. But what do you think? Like, is this worse or just normal Trump?
I don't it's hard to say because from over the last 4 years, we've seen that Trump can say a lot of things that really won't affect his base, really won't affect his core audience and his core followers. And me and many others have always thought, if there was to be anything that would at least nudge those voters maybe the wrong way or start to, it would be if he said something bad about the military and said something bad about religion, right? I mean, these are like GOP, testaments. Like American politics in general, you don't say anything bad about the military, right? Even like super liberal politicians like Bernie Sanders that want to maybe like readjust military funding would never like bash the troops. Like that's just a taboo in this country in politics. And for Trump to then literally call troops dead veterans, losers and suckers, and to basically say, why would I go to a cemetery of dead soldiers? They're a bunch of losers, right? This is the kind of thing that I think would actually affect some Trump voters, right? There's not a lot we've seen over the time. There's really not a lot that he can't say, but this is what I would say he can't say.
Definitely. I mean, like I definitely later want to get into the Bob Woodward stuff because I have kind of an unpopular opinion on that. But when it comes to the Atlantic article and then, the Fox News reports and everything else that came out after it, yeah, I mean, it's appalling. But at the same time, honestly, it really seems to fit Trump's character.
Right.
And which I mean, just kind of backtracking, I mean, that surprises me that before this actually came out, there weren't more conservatives who maybe condemned his comments about, John McCain. John Kelly, his ex-chief of staff who lost the son in Afghanistan. There's reports that Trump said, well, why would he even go over there in the first place? I mean, I think we've seen a trend. I mean, Trump has condemned McCain, H.W. Bush, true war heroes who stayed with their team even when they didn't even have to or could have got out. And so it's very fitting. It's very fitting. And so I'm unfortunately not surprised. But my biggest takeaway is that I don't think Trump has an understanding of what service means, because it kind of sounds like he thinks that anyone who loses a war or dies in a war is a loser. Like he doesn't seem to understand that if you're not winning or if you're not making a bunch of money, maybe there's another reason why you're doing this. And so he doesn't just understand that maybe some people want to be part of something bigger than them. And that's my biggest concern with these comments, is that it just shows that our president doesn't understand service. And I'm not saying every American has to be a veteran or serve or go overseas, but the fact he's not even willing to maybe tone down his rhetoric is kind of appalling to me. And I do think you're right that I think this will get a lot of independents and moderates even more pissed off with him if it's possible. But again, I don't know if it's going to actually impact that, 35% either.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, look. I mean, if you look at the polls, he certainly still has most of his base. But there was a jump, like since the first week of September, Trump went down a few points and Biden went up a few points. And I have to imagine it's something to do with this, right? I mean, we'll see how long. I don't know if that'll last all the way to the election, but it's certainly a really bad look. Back to kind of what you think about his character. I mean, again, like, I'm no expert on psychiatry, so I'm just going to play our armchair psychiatrist right here for fun, just because we can. I think, like, this to me, it shows like narcissism, right? And complete self-preservation. Like, his whole mantra is it's all about his self-preservation. So in his mind, he couldn't understand why would anyone want to go out to war? Like, why would anyone join the military? Because that would go against self-preservation. Like, you're putting yourself at risk. Whereas not everyone has that. Like, not everyone's idea of, like, no, not everyone lives for self-preservation, right? Some people obviously make sacrifices for things they believe in. Or, and like in the case of Vietnam, have no choice. So, it is, and like you said, let's take a look at the public comments. So, like, for those that are like, well, these are, comments that are made behind closed doors, so to speak, and how can we trust the Atlantic? One, the Atlantic is a reputable, news service, and it's been corroborated by, like you said, Fox News with some comments. So it's been corroborated by multiple sources, the Associated Press as well. But let's take that aside. His public comments match up with this. He says, I like soldiers that don't get captured, right? Making fun of John McCain being tortured as a POW in Vietnam. And he said things about like Black Star, or what is it, like the
Gold
Star? Sorry, yeah, like Gold Star families because they were on the Democratic side. And so he's definitely made public comments that could lead me to believe that he would also make comments like this behind closed doors. Now, of course, he would never say this at a campaign rally. Like, people that are like, well, but he said he likes the troops when he visited the naval base. Of course he did. He's a politician. You're going to go to a naval base and bash the troops? Like, no. Of course, on camera he says something different. But this is that locker room talk that shows your true character.
Yeah, and no, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. And, I think part of Trump's problem with this, too, is that he kind of seems, I think, only to see the military as a political apparatus for his benefit or lack of benefit, I guess. And I'm not, I mean, like I think you mentioned earlier, Bernie Sanders is clearly, probably a big proponent of cutting the military. And so would people like Rand Paul on the other side. And I think Trump's even kind of part of that. I don't know. I don't know where he stands on that, honestly. But anyways, like, I think that is, like, it's in some ways a bipartisan issue, is that there are people on both sides who think the military is too big. But that doesn't mean that you can't understand what sacrifice means and
right.
and putting yourself in those shoes, And as I recall, the Atlantic story was back when they were in France, right? And Trump's excuse was, oh, well, there was a bunch of fog and I didn't want us to crash the chopper. And other sources are like, that's not really how it went. He just called them, suckers and losers and didn't want to go, pay respects. And I just think that's really uncool. And, kind of what you mentioned earlier, I have it here, is that CNN's pollster, who's Jen Agiesta, wrote this week that the data shows, in quotes, this story appears to have had a more widespread and quick impact on what Americans are hearing about Trump than any other controversial story about the president. And I think it is just because, like you said, and I totally agree with it, is that, military service, even if you disagree with the war, is somewhat sacred.
Yeah.
And also, like, I mean, just going back to the stuff he has said in the open, I mean, you're right. There's no recording of him calling these guys losers and suckers, but he basically called John McCain a loser and a sucker, right? He's like, I like people who don't get caught. McCain could have got out, but stayed until everyone could have got out back, when they were shot down back during the Vietnam War. And H.W. Bush, Trump has also called him, a loser and a sucker. But H.W. Bush was also involved in heavy conflict and, was loyal and stayed with his troops. And I just think there's just a really big disconnect there. And it'll be interesting to see, because I don't know if you heard much of his public comments, after all this bombshell information came out, where then he talked about how he's really unpopular with the military establishment, and the lobbyists. And he's like, oh, they hate me because I'm anti-war. And so my theory is that for some Americans, Trump calling veterans suckers and losers, and then also disparaging the lobbyists and the military complex, might actually appeal to some of his base.
It's really interesting that he spun it that way, right? Like he spun it as, no, I'm anti-establishment. I'm going against the military-industrial complex. I mean, and like, yeah, to that QAnon guy, right, who just eats up anything that Trump says, then yes, that's what those people will use to justify overlooking it. Because let's be real, calling dead soldiers losers and suckers has nothing to do with commenting on the industrialized military system and its deals with Boeing and Blackwater. Like, that's a different conversation. So yeah, an interesting way to deflect it, but I don't think it's going to work. I mean, the QAnon guys already going to vote for Trump anyway. There's no way that those conspiratorial right-wing Trump fans are ever going to just wake up one day and then feel persuaded to vote for Biden. So maybe it is trying to appeal to his base, but it's a lot of the people in the middle that really are going to have a problem with this. And I think that, I think that it's like this is a golden egg handed to Joe Biden for these debates. I still think Trump is going to put up a good fight against Biden in these debates. And a couple months ago, I thought Biden was going to get creamed, like absolutely wiped the floor with. But this is big ammo. This is big ammo. I mean, all Joe Biden has to do is go up there and hammer this home of like, my family has a history of military service. Trump dodged it. Here's all this proof. Here's what he says about your sons and daughters. Like, you can really hammer this home, and he should. If I was his speechwriter, if I was his, like, debate coach, I would basically be like, repeat this multiple times throughout the debate, that he's disparaged the military, called them suckers. Bring up heavy things and be like, is my son a loser and a sucker? Like, put him on the spot. And Donald Trump just handed it to him, right?
Yeah. And I mean, actually, yeah, last night I was watching Monday Night Football. By the way, I'm glad football's back, but I was watching Monday Night Football, and there was a commercial. It was a Biden campaign ad, and it did show Biden, and his son Beau Biden, his late son Beau Biden, who was, in the military. And it was Biden kind of, I don't want to say milking it because that sounds kind of insensitive, but it was Biden making clear that he supports the military and respects the sacrifice. And I think you're right. I think that's going to go a long, long way. And again, I think this whole thing just shows what a fraud Trump is in terms of messaging, because, back in 2016 when he was running against Hillary, he talked about how he'd get all the generals, how he's loved by the military. And I mean, what we're seeing is that, he couldn't get along with anybody in the military that was in his cabinet. Mattis and McMaster couldn't get out quick enough. Even Kelly, who's quite conservative, couldn't even, get along with him. And so I think it's interesting, like, Trump claims to be the military, but on a day-to-day basis, he almost disagrees with everything they think and want to do. And we saw that inside of the White House, and I think it's just going to be interesting. But I also don't really know if it's going to change a lot of, his base, but obviously doesn't matter. But like you said, we just need to hope that it appeals to kind of the more college-educated conservatives, maybe college-educated independents, and veterans. And
Right.
and hopefully veterans, I know Trump is doing pretty well with veterans. Hopefully that will change. Yeah, it's going to be tough. I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that one, but I think it would be kind of interesting to get on to the Bob Woodward stuff,
Sure,
with
let's do it.
downplaying coronavirus.
Yeah, let's do
What
it.
are your takeaways from that? Is that as big of a bombshell in your opinion?
Well, it confirms what we've seen publicly for months, right? I know that Trump has been downplaying the virus because he literally says, stop testing, and, it's no big deal, and one day it'll go away. Of course he's been downplaying it, but it proves that he had intent to do so. It's not ignorance, right? The Bob Woodward comments, it's not ignorance of like, oh, I didn't know. A lot of people told me things and I just kind of went with it. It was, now we know that he actually knew how serious it was and decided against informing the public the truth and decided to downplay it for political gain. So, in my opinion, this is like impeachable offense territory, right? We're talking about lying to the American people about a public health hazard. Now, is it worth impeaching him again? Will that benefit anything? No, I don't think so. I think the best thing to do now, and the Democrats know this, is just get him out of office through the election. But it's to me it's on it adds on a huge laundry list of like he lies to the American people, and this is a perfect example. And again, it just confirms what I've already known for months. But perhaps for other people that are like, well, he did block us off from China a little bit. Like, that was a good thing. Sure, it was, but he also lied to you because he knew exactly how bad it was. And he admitted to Bob Woodward that he was downplaying it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I love that argument that people use that, well, he shut us off from China early on. True, he did that. But the problem is that, the strain of the virus that hit New York City and a lot of the East Coast, it's pretty much proven that it came from Europe, more specifically Italy and Spain at the beginning. So, like I mean, two things can be true at once is that,
Right.
he did close us off from China, but he did lose us about, a couple months. But, I do step back on this one a little bit because I've been seeing this hashtag going around Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and everything, hashtag Trump knew. And like, I don't think my opinion is going to be popular on this, but I honestly don't think Trump disparaging veterans and Trump downplaying the virus in this Bob Woodward recording are even close to being as worrying, especially because, this recording was in February. And even though Trump talks about the severity of the virus and how, it didn't stay on surfaces, but was, airborne, that was something that was still debatable amongst the entire community in the United States. And I mean, Fauci's been interviewed. I think I saw him on CNN a couple days ago where he mentioned that, that was kind of the messaging amongst the whole administration, Fauci included, was downplaying the virus at the beginning. I mean, Fauci did it, when like beginning with masks, right? When there was a shortage of masks, he was talking about, give it to your health. I mean, that's not really downplaying, but it's trying to just soothe the public narrative during a time of uncertainty. And clearly Trump doesn't always do that, mainly because he's very fine with fueling the flames on certain things, obviously.
Right.
Like, he dog whistles all the time. So I don't like the argument that, well, Trump was just trying to calm public opinion. Probably not. He probably...
I think he was trying. I think he was
I,
trying to calm the stock markets. I think he was trying to calm the markets.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, you have a really good point, right, about like the masks, right? But I think there's a difference between, Fauci not wanting to cause panic, but having a very clear message of like, right now we need masks for the hospitals. We do want people to social distance, right? It's one thing to be like, okay, well, let's try and package this in a way that Americans can swallow, but we need to be clear and informative. Whereas Trump was, I'm going to try and package it in a way that won't freak out the markets and maybe also Americans can swallow. But he was unclear and uninformative, and then, led to, do I need a mask at all? Is this a pandemic? And now you have a very, very active conspiracy movement that thinks this whole thing is fake. And I mean, you see them all over. People think this is just fake. I think part of that is because of how unclear the messaging was from the administration in the early stages of the virus.
Definitely. No, and I think everything he does is very milquetoast and calming down, dissent and also just conspiracy fringes. Like, I agree with you. I do think that as president, he needed to probably be a voice of reason during this time more than any other thing. I mean, it's one thing when there's protests for him to, say that, like all the stuff he's been doing. But it's a whole different thing when the entire world is having a pandemic and we just need someone to give us some certainty.
Right.
But again, like going back to the Trump knew like message that's going around, especially on the left, is that I don't really think Trump knew that much. Like, we have to remember, he was just babbling to Bob Woodward. And Trump is definitely a science denier who doesn't listen to experts. Excuse me. So do you really think he actually knew that much about the virus during this time, or he was just spewing? And that's my issue, is that I love Bob Woodward. I think he writes some really fascinating stuff. And, obviously he was instrumental in the Watergate investigations. But at the same time, we don't live during the time of Watergate. And Bob Woodward is in my opinion, somewhat of a pseudo-journalist, where he does kind of go into these situations and kind of get you to be comfortable with him. And there's no expectation that you're going to reason with Bob Woodward. It's more just you're going to spew. And I think that Bob Woodward kind of dangled the prize in front of Trump and tried to get buddy with him, and it kind of allowed Trump to open up. And I'm not saying that what Trump said is false because of that, but I also think we have to remember that, like, this definitely was almost set up interview. And like the Atlantic had a good piece, on this exact thing where Bob Woodward has a record of kind of these transactions, like exchange for access and information. He also gives Washington people this sense of comfort in exchange for monetary gains. And like, he had been friends with Trump before his first book, Fear, came out. Like, it talks about how he actually gave Trump a platform, to discredit the Russia investigation, and he allowed Trump to babble about it. So I just think that Trump thought that he could sway Woodward's opinion in this interview, and he didn't. And that's not, justifying what Trump said, but I just think we have to remember that Trump was definitely led to speak like this. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I mean,
it's tough. It's tough.
I mean, isn't that part of what, especially like more like personal journalism like that? Isn't that part of it? Of like I know the documentarian from the BBC, Louis Theroux, does a similar thing where he makes you feel very comfortable, and he just asks you very simple questions and doesn't judge you while he interviews you. He just kind of lets you lead the way, but he, in reality, he's actually leading the way because he's a good interviewer. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Like, does that mean then that what people say are invalid? No, like, I think it still should be. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump blabbles a lot, right? I mean, probably half the things he says he doesn't remember he says. So, I understand that. And it was early, right? It was in February. But I would be a lot more forgiving if in March and April, when we did have a better idea of what was happening, Donald Trump changed his tune. But it didn't. He continued to downplay it and didn't wear a mask in public until like June, right? So there are steps that I've seen publicly that make me worried that back in February, it does seem like he had an idea of, well, it does seem like this is really bad, but I'm going to downplay it because I think it'll benefit me politically. And that is bothersome, right? When you have a public health crisis and a politician is thinking about themselves first.
Yeah.
So sure, he might have just been babbling to Bob Woodward in a back room and just trying to make him feel good. But that's still, again, it's alone, you're right. Alone, it's not enough, but it's in that line of dots that we can all connect to see his behavior has a through line of him downplaying the virus over months.
Right. No, and exactly. I mean, I just think that almost every president who has, Bob Woodward's written a book about every president in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's tricky talking to him because he does have a certain way of kind of, cajoling you into spewing. And I feel like that's Trump's worst nightmare, right? Like this is the worst guy to deal with Trump. And you would really think that someone would tell Woodward to F off inside of Trump's administration, to be completely honest. Like,
yeah.
In the book Fear, Woodward actually lays into Kellyanne Conway because she tried to get rid of Woodward. Like, she never returned calls. She tried to make sure Trump never got his calls because she knew. But clearly, like, the standard is dropping. But I do agree with you that I would give Trump more of a benefit of the doubt in February when no one really was certain. And obviously there was no consensus amongst epidemiologists in the United States on this. But you're right. Sure. In April, still not wearing a mask. And now, going into June, these, mass event, mass spreading rallies he's throwing. I mean, it's just too bad.
Herman Cain attended. Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, it's just like his whole administration's acting like the virus and the pandemic are gone. And they keep talking about it in the past tense. So it's worrying. I agree with you.
It's worrying. But politically speaking, as far as the election's concerned, this one doesn't, the coronavirus one, I don't think means anything, right? I'm already pissed off at his pandemic response. A lot of people on the left and in the middle are as well. But a lot of people on the right are not going to care about this, especially the really Trump stands. The big Trump fans, they're not going to care about this. They think it's all, overblown anyway. They probably think, yeah, Trump's right to downplay it because everyone else is overblowing it. So this isn't going to matter. It's the military one that I think does have the poison sting enough to actually sway some right-wing voters because, like we mentioned earlier, military service in this country is sacred.
Right. And, kind of going on to that, so we've talked – well, actually, no, there is one more thing I did want to mention too, which is his Health and Human Services Secretary for Public Affairs, who's Michael Caputo, who, by the way, is not a doctor or a medical expert. And I think it was yesterday. Yeah, I believe it was yesterday. He basically did a Facebook Live video and warned his subscribers and followers that Democrats, will not let Trump win the election. And he said that, in quotes, when Donald Trump refuses to stand down at the inauguration, the shooting will begin, end quotes. Jeez. And he basically warned all of Trump's supporters to buy ammo because there won't be any. Like, that's dangerous. That's scary. I'm more worried sometimes about some of these sycophantic people around Trump than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that is terrifying. That's a terrifying
Yeah.
thing to say. Um, and it just goes in line with, how worried I am about this country and how worried everyone else is, because everyone is feeling this weird tension over this year, and that is terrifying. That you have someone saying,
Yes.
basically buy ammo because the Civil War is coming on Inauguration Day. I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope he's wrong, but good Lord, that's awful. That's an awful thing to say.
It is. It is, and I tell people to read the book Homage to Catalonia by Mr. Orwell. It's not a happy book. I won't spoil the story, but it's pre-Spanish Civil War, and it's kind of Orwell's opinion on it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of similarities. So yeah, give it a read if you want something extra happy before Election Day. But now, one of the ramifications for this, I saw in the New York Times that the Trump campaign reported in August that that they have $154 million less than Biden, and they've blown through close to $1 billion in campaign financing.
Yeah.
And so basically, Trump is short on money. And I would say it's probably because he's running his campaign like he's ran his businesses. Do you think this is worrying or just kind of normal Trump?
Well, it also explains his campaign manager switch, which I covered on a Catching Up about a month or so ago, or 2 months ago. Explains that as well. I think Brad Parscale was probably spending their campaign into the ground. They thought that they would get a big boost early on. I mean, they bought Super Bowl ads in February for, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And February feels like, I mean, you can't predict this year, right? But February feels like 4 years ago at this point. I mean, the way this year's going. So, I mean, you could pretty much say that all that Super Bowl ad money was wasted because we live in a different world now. So, yeah, I mean, I think that might have played into why they changed campaign managers because, there's a ton of different levels to get up there, but the campaign manager does oversee all the ad buys, at a certain level. I'm sure they have, obviously media managers and media specialists, but they get everything has to get okay by a campaign manager. So that's probably why they got rid of that guy. I wonder. I mean, I don't know, because I also think that Trump tried to, because back in the beginning of the year, it was still a question if it was going to be Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. So there really wasn't a lot of big donors deciding, like, okay, we have our Democratic nominee to go behind, like, a lot of money for. And so I think Trump had a lot more money early on because he's the only Republican candidate that has a chance. So he had a lot of more money early on. But now, now Biden is the guy for the Democrats. Even Bloomberg just said he's going to spend $100 million in Florida alone to support Biden. I mean, serious cash. And so I think the late game spending, Biden is winning. I mean, we can see it. We can see the numbers. Definitely late game spending, Biden is winning. And, yeah, I mean, for lack of a better term, pardon my French here, but it almost does seem like the Trump campaign blew his load too soon. Like they should have but they should have saved this media blitz. They should have saved this media blitz for now. Because I mean, there's like, you should have saved it for like the debates. Like, wait for some debates, and then when Biden says something stupid, you blow him out of the water with spending. But it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do that. I'm sure they're still going to have some last-minute, donations. Every campaign does. But, I think, but I do think that, I think it's less of a reflection on Trump himself and more of a reflection on Brad Parscale.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. That's not something I thought about, but that catching up you did was really good because I think you did kind of outline this difference of kind of management style that was probably needing to change, because you're right, they did screw the pooch. I mean, they jumped out, I think, just assuming that Bernie was maybe going to be the nominee, and obviously that backfired. But now the thing is, though, Trump is known for at the last minute getting money. Like, that is kind of like his whole historical trend. Like, The Atlantic does a great piece, kind of outlining Trump's bankruptcy history. Mm-hmm. And, his first bankruptcy in 1991, was when he built the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, which was an SH hole, if you really want to talk about true true shithole stuff. But basically he just, spent it to the ground and declared bankruptcy, and he was forced to sell off some treasured assets like his yacht, his airline, blah blah blah. And basically he became toxic by the end of the 90s. No one wanted to give him loans, no one wanted to work with him except for Deutsche Bank, who were basically known for giving loans to almost everyone. And then Trump also turned to Russian investors after that and got a new source of cash for building other projects. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think Trump's ever been really good with managing his money. I think it just depends if he can get the right amount of money at the end. So it'll be interesting. But again, Biden has, record numbers right now. I mean, he has a combined 364 million in just August alone. And then, like you mentioned, Bloomberg's now going to, I think it was, 100 million?
Yeah.
So it's not a good look. Not a good look for Trump. But I'm not going to count him out yet, because I was watching Bill Maher from a couple days ago. And Bill Maher's panel, everyone was acting like Biden's going to win again. And I'm just not ready to think that yet, because with Trump, you just never know.
Yeah, well, and again, if you look at 2016, Hillary Clinton spent a lot more in ads than Trump. But, we have to remember that Trump's biggest loudspeaker is Twitter, and that's free. He doesn't have to spend a dime on his tweets.
Right.
And they're the best way he gets out his message. So, his social media prowess, in a weird way, if you could call it that, is what got him elected in 2016. And again, yeah, you don't need a big budget to do that. So there's definitely that aspect that I think he has over Joe Biden. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We will have to see. And I bet you saw, but it kind of looks like, I don't know if it's actually true, but it kind of looks like Trump and Biden might be going on Joe Rogan to debate.
I don't know. I don't even know if Joe Biden knows who Joe Rogan is, but we'll have to see.
Trump obviously does.
I can't wait for that moment where Joe Rogan asks them both if they've ever tried DMTs.
How do you feel about spirit molecule? Yeah. How do you guys feel about mushroom tea?
Joe Biden's going to be like, the Department of Motor and Transit is amazing. And like, no, Joe, it's a drug.
Yeah, I would love to see that, but also at the same time, I don't think either man could do a 3 or 4 hour Joe Rogan.
No,
so, it'd be kind of cringy.
It would probably be the most watched podcast episode ever, though, which would be fun to see. But I doubt it'll happen. But you know what? Anything can happen this year because there's no rules, I guess.
There are no rules, because I did not have Joe Biden hosting a debate on my 2020 bingo card. I don't know about you, but I did not. So who knows? But I don't know. Do you have any last thoughts on this? All the moving target of Trump's presidency here?
No, it's just for now, it's like, we've seen a little bit of a movement in the polls because of his comments on the military. But I'm interested to see when it comes back up in the debates. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you guys think? Is this serious stuff? Is it just normal Trump? Is this just a shoe-in for Biden? Let us know. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, here on Twitch, those third-party sites. And we'll be back later this week where Drew and I are both going to be taking a political compass test. It'll kind of tell us, where our views align. Are we just purely left, purely right? Are we socialists, anarchists? I don't know. We'll find out. So take care, and we'll see you guys later.